Heckler Koch G11. Developed in West Germany by a consortium called Gesellschaft für Hülsenlose Gewehrsysteme, with Heckler & Koch on the mechanism, Dynamit Nobel on propellant, and Hensoldt on optics, the G11 grew from late 1960s feasibility studies into a multi-decade program aimed at raising a rifleman's hit probability while cutting ammunition weight and volume. Concept work began around 1967 to 68, formal studies in 1968 to 69, and iterative prototypes continued through the 1970s and 1980s, culminating in the K1 configuration in 1987 and a final K2 iteration by about 1990. It entered Bundeswehr troop trials and the U.S. Advanced Combat Rifle Program as a candidate to replace the G3. The design pursued probability of hit rather than muzzle energy. It used a compact bullpup layout with an integral Hensoldt optic and a 3-round burst that completed before the shooter perceived recoil, placing a tight salvo on target. Ammunition took the form of a 4.73 by 33 mm telescoped caseless block that removed extraction and ejection from the cycle and promised substantial weight savings. A rotating transverse chamber aligned perpendicular to the bore for feeding, then rotated 90 degrees to fire. The firing module floated on rails. In burst, 3 shots left the barrel at roughly 2,100 rounds per minute before the module struck the buffer and transmitted recoil. Trials revealed both progress and limits. Early cook-offs forced withdrawal from late 1970s NATO testing. A switch to high ignition temperature propellant raised thermal margins by roughly 100 degrees Celsius and allowed renewed field evaluation. Bundeswehr troop trials at Hammelburg from 1987 to 1989 reported markedly higher hit probability than the G3, while U.S. ACR testing did not show the Army's desired doubling of performance. The sealed mechanism resisted dirt ingress, yet demanded tight manufacturing tolerances and new maintenance habits. Prototype evolution included at least 14 numbered builds, with documented examples preserved at the Wehrtechnische Studiensammlung in Koblenz. The family branched conceptually to a light machine gun, LMG-11, and a compact 4.73 by 25 mm weapon for short-range defense, while the main line standardized on the 4.73 by 33 mm DM11 cartridge and the Hensoldt Z01 optic after earlier reflex sight ideas proved less practical. The program reached a near adoption point around 1990 with certification and budget planning, then met the realities of German reunification, treaty limits, plentiful surplus Warsaw Pact arms, and NATO standardization on 5.56 by 45. Procurement ended after roughly 1,000 units in various forms, and the Bundeswehr moved on to the G36. Technical work migrated into later projects such as LSAT, which reused caseless intellectual property and rotating chamber ideas. XM29 OICW. The XM29 combined a 5.56 by 45 mm carbine with a 20 by 28 mm programmable airburst launcher under the U.S. Army's Objective Individual Combat Weapon Program, with Alliant Tech Systems as prime and Heckler & Koch as a major subcontractor. The idea emerged from late Cold War doctrine that sought to defeat enemies behind cover and in complex terrain by pairing kinetic fire with electronics-enabled airburst effects on a single shoulder arm. Prototypes and demonstrators circulated from the mid-1990s into the early 2000s. Integration and fire control defined the concept. A top-mounted sighting unit housed a laser rangefinder and ballistic computer to program each high-explosive round, while the kinetic module drew on G36 family design. The 20 mm launcher used small, detachable 5-round magazines and deliberate semi-automatic pacing. The 5.56 module accepted Stanag magazines. Developmental testing produced consistent findings. Programming worked as intended and offered a method to engage defilade positions. The integrated system was heavy and awkward for patrol carry, and the small projectile's fragmentation and lethality raised questions relative to its logistic footprint. Reliability for a shoulder-fired package that combined two operating mechanisms with an electronics suite demanded ruggedization beyond early demonstrators. Program management split the effort, rather than push for adoption of the integrated form. The kinetic module continued as XM8, the launcher as the standalone XM25. A later reintegration increment remained aspirational. The integrated XM29 ended. The airburst fire control idea migrated to other programs, and lightweight ammunition research continued separately. AO-63. The AO-63 was a Tsnitochmash entry in the Soviet Abakan program, which sought a successor to the AK-74 with significantly higher early burst hit probability. Designed in 1984 and entered into trials in 1986, it addressed the requirement with two 5.45 by 39 mm barrels, twin gas pistons, and rotating bolts arranged side by side to deliver extremely rapid pairs before recoil displaced aim. A right side selector offered semi-automatic fire from one barrel, a full auto mode that alternated barrels with a brief inter-barrel delay, and a two-round burst around 6,000 RPM combined rate that then defaulted to roughly 850 RPM for sustained automatic fire. The 45-round magazine combined a 30-round double-column section with a 15-round single-column section to manage feed geometry. Contemporary reporting described the rifle as accurate, simple, and reliable within trials. Yet, it was dropped from the competition while the AN-94 advanced. Specific scoring, failure data, or cost figures are not included in the reference material. In the context of Abakan, both the AO-63 and AN-94 solved the same timing problem differently. The AO-63 achieved near-simultaneous impacts by doubling barrels. The AN-94 did so by retiming a single operating group and feed path. T-Series experimental rifles. The U.S. post-war rifle story runs through a series of T designations that began as late World War II updates to the M1 Garand and evolved into early Cold War attempts to create a lighter, select-fire rifle around the T65 cartridge that became 7.62 by 51 mm NATO. The arc includes exploratory mechanisms that stalled, conversions that kept familiar architecture, and a final evolutionary path that produced the T44 and then the M14. During this period, an American adaptation of the FNFAL, designated T48, provided a direct comparator in trials. The T20 and T22 extended the Garand concept into select fire with detachable magazines. The T20 paired 3006 with a 20-round box and represented the kind of controllability expected from a full-power automatic rifle of the era. Remington's T22 approached similar goals with a BAR-style magazine intended to speed reloads. Testing in 1944–45 showed a practical path to production, but the war ended and urgency waned. The T20E2's longer receiver later provided the basis for conversions to the new T65 cartridge as T36 and T37. Earl Harvey's T25 aimed to produce a 7-pound 7.62 by 51 rifle that remained durable and accurate while being manufacturable in dispersed shops. It used a gas cutoff and expansion system, a locking scheme that placed the bolt in compression, and an inline stock with a brake to moderate recoil. Early tests demonstrated notable structural strength and accuracy over the M1 baseline, but the light weight challenged controllability in full auto. The line moved through T35 and culminated in T47. Issues that began in T25 persisted into T47 and undermined confidence. The T28 explored roller locking around the T65 requirement, but experienced slam fires extraction failures, and breakage that indicated the locking concept needed substantial refinement. The T-31 applied a bullpup layout to the same cartridge in a collaboration among John Garand, Cyril Moore, and Earl Harvey. It promised compactness with a full-length barrel, but did not progress beyond prototypes. As the light rifle effort matured, the T-36 and T-37 conversions pulled proven M1 architecture toward T-65, and the program swung back to evolution. The T-44, the product-improved Garand lineage, engineered for 7.62 by 51, competed against T-25-derived work and the T-48 FAL adaptation. Trials concluded with the T-44 selected and standardized as the M14, a decision that favored familiarity, reliability, and support infrastructure over clean-sheet innovations. AAIACR. AAI Corporation's entry to the late 1980s Advanced Combat Rifle Program represented a mature endpoint of decades of U.S. work with flechette projectiles that began with Project Salvo and SPIW. The Army sought a substantial improvement in first-hit probability over the M16A2. No Phase 3 entrant met the requirement, but the AAI design captured a fully developed flechette concept in a soldier-familiar package. Externally, the rifle behaved like a conventional 5.56 by 45 weapon. Internally, the cartridge carried a liquid crystal polymer sabot holding a 1.6 by 41.27 mm fin-stabilized dart weighing roughly 2/3 of a gram. A gas system using an entrapped gas piston limited fouling in the mechanism. Fire control provided semi-automatic and a fixed 3-round burst intended to concentrate dispersion in a narrow time window. Because the case resembled 5.56 ball externally, AAI altered the magazines and the magwell to reduce the risk of loading standard ammunition. Trials reflected the core trade. Very high velocity and very light projectiles produced flat trajectories and low recoil, yet also unusual muzzle signature and blast as sabots separated. Specialized projectiles increased ammunition complexity relative to the M16A2 baseline. The ACR program concluded without adoption after determining that overall gains did not justify replacement of an established rifle and cartridge. Relative to the Steyr ACR and other contemporaries, the AAI rifle took a different mechanical route to similar ballistic goals and encountered the same hurdles of signature, ammunition cost, and logistics. SPIW. The special-purpose individual weapon grew from Project Salvo and Niblick in an effort to increase a rifleman's probability of a hit by pairing micro-projectile rifles with an integrated grenade launcher. The strategic premise favored lighter ammunition, extreme velocities, and very high cyclic bursts that a soldier could control, with major contractors including AAI, Springfield Armory, Winchester, and Harrington and Richardson across the 1950s and 1960s. Work later fed into the future rifle effort and informed the ACR program. Design paths varied. Flechettes in sabots offered flat trajectories and allowed a soldier to carry more ammunition. Prototypes explored bullpup layouts, tandem magazines, multiple barrel burst simulators, and stock systems intended to mitigate recoil. Grenade modules, whether overbarrel or underbarrel, were part of the core requirement and eventually yielded practical hardware independent of flechette rifles. Testing identified consistent constraints. Flechettes penetrated well and flew fast, but exhibited dispersion and aerodynamic sensitivity in real weather that reduced practical hit chances on moving or partially exposed targets. Compact, high-rate mechanisms accumulated heat quickly and risked cook-offs. Cost per round remained high. No prototype satisfied the Army's combined performance, reliability, and weight thresholds. Even without a service rifle, the program produced useful artifacts. Launcher work led directly to the widely adopted M203. AAI's later prototypes improved sabot materials and reduced earlier plastic dust problems. AN-94. Gennady Nikhonov's AN-94 pursued Abakan's objective while retaining the 5.45 by 39 cartridge and AK pattern magazines. Development ran from 1980 into the early 1990s, with limited production after 1994. The aim was to improve the probability of hits in the first instant of an engagement without forcing a change of caliber or magazine type across the force. The operating system uses gas drive and a rotating bolt, but the feed path and timing differ substantially from AK family rifles. The magazine sits slightly canted. A pulley and rod system pre-positions the second round as the bolt cycles. After the first shot, the carrier group moves rearward for extraction and ejection. The mechanism then drives forward and fires a second round before the assembly completes its recoil stroke and reaches the rear stop. Fielding stayed limited. The rifle required more maintenance knowledge and careful part support than AK pattern designs, and training had to accommodate a different handling rhythm in two-shot mode. Units with specialized missions employed it in small numbers, and isolated foreign transfers occurred. Compared with the AK-74 family, the AN-94 kept cartridge and magazine commonality while trading mechanical simplicity for a timing mechanism that improved early burst effectiveness. Enfield E-M2. The EM2 was the United Kingdom's post-war attempt to standardize an intermediate cartridge in a compact, accurate bullpup with optics. Designed at the Armament Design Establishment and prototyped at RSAF Enfield with contributions from BSA and Chambon's, it drew on the 1945 Small Arms Caliber Panel's conclusions. Work ran from 1948 to 1950. The rifle was adopted briefly on 25 April 1951 as Rifle No. 9 Mk1, and the decision was reversed as NATO moved toward 7.62 by 51. Mechanically, the rifle used a long-stroke gas piston above the barrel, a flapper-locked bolt, and a 20-round magazine in a bullpup layout. The .280 British cartridge aimed to combine controllable automatic fire with effective range, avoiding the recoil of full-power .30 caliber rounds. An integral unit sight indicated a doctrinal emphasis on rapid target acquisition and marksmanship through optics. Aberdeen trials in 1951 set the EM2 against the US T25/T44 and the Belgian FAL, where the debate centered on cartridge choice as much as rifle mechanics. The EM2 showed accuracy and the advantages of a long barrel in a short package, but conversion to 7.62 by 51 strained the design, while the FAL absorbed that change more gracefully. The EM2's mechanism did not lead to later British bullpups mechanically, yet the configuration of bullpup paired with an optic reappeared decades later in service philosophy. Surviving examples, on the order of a few dozen, are preserved in collections. MCEM2. The MCEM2 was a compact British machine carbine designed at RSAF Enfield in 1944 by Jerzy Podsiadkowski. It continued into immediate post-war trials as a candidate to replace the Sten with a controllable, compact 9x19mm weapon intended for vehicle crews, airborne troops, and rear area personnel. The MCEM family produced several variants, none of which were adopted. The Patchett, later Sterling, prevailed. The design placed the magazine in the pistol grip and used a telescoping bolt wrapped around the barrel to keep the receiver short while preserving bolt mass. It fired from an open bolt in straight blowback. Early prototypes registered a very high cyclic rate of roughly 1,000 rounds per minute, which complicated control in automatic fire. Trials emphasized controllability, reliability, and service handling. The Patchett offered a lower rate of fire, robust feed design, and maintainability that met Ordnance Board expectations, while the MCEM family needed further work to reduce rate and integrate better magazines. The layout anticipated successful later designs that used the same principles, magazine in the grip and telescoping bolt, as seen in the SA-VZ23 and the Uzi. Type 63701 Experimental Family. Project 66136 directed Chinese designers in the late 1960s to produce a domestically designed service rifle that broke with Soviet patterns. The effort produced 3 701 prototypes by June 1970. The broader goal was to demonstrate indigenous design capacity while retaining familiarity in cartridge choice. The 701 used a delayed blowback action with 7.62 by 39 mm and a straight 20-round box magazine, rather than the curved AK pattern. The external layout echoed familiar carbines, but the mechanism departed from the gas piston systems that had proven reliable with the Soviet intermediate cartridge. Trials recorded chamber fouling, inconsistent bolt interaction with the chamber, and variable automatic rate of fire, indicating that the delayed blowback system struggled with extraction and heat in the intended operating environment. A subsequent revival produced the Type 5 by converting the action to a gas piston while retaining layout lessons, including the straight magazine idea. That line did not enter service. Instead, the experience contributed to the development of the Type 81, which adopted a short-stroke piston and rotating bolt, and delivered the expected reliability and controllability. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and sharing it with folks who'd enjoy it. And let us know in the comments what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching.